Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The turbulence within. The alarm buzzed with ruthless determination at 4:30 a.m., slicing through Amanda Cartwright's restless sleep. She groaned, slapping it off with more force than necessary, then lay motionless, staring at the dimly lit ceiling of her tiny queen's apartment. The room felt oppressively quiet except for the faint hum of a passing car outside. She finally mustered the energy to rise, her body heavy with exhaustion from yet another sleepless night. In the bathroom, Amanda examined her reflection. The woman staring back looked older than her 34 years. The dark circles under her eyes seemed permanently etched into her pale skin, and the streaks of gray that threaded her brown hair betrayed years of stress and neglect. She adjusted her navy blue flight attendant uniform, a symbol of a career she had once loved but now felt chained to. Just one more flight, she muttered to herself, though she didn't believe it. She hadn't believed it in years. The drive to JFK Airport was monotonous. Early morning traffic crawled along, horns blaring as impatient drivers jockeyed for position. Amanda's mind drifted as she tapped her fingers on the steering wheel, a nervous habit that seemed to intensify with each passing day. It wasn't the job itself that had worn her down but everything that came with it, the demanding schedules, the irate passengers, the endless bureaucracy, and the growing sense that her life was slipping away in a haze of high altitudes and low morale. When Amanda arrived at the crew briefing, she forced herself to focus as the supervisor reviewed safety protocols and flight details. Her colleagues chatted animatedly about their weekend plans, their energy starkly contrasting her detached demeanor. Amanda, ever the professional, smiled when expected, nodded at the right times, and even laughed at a poorly told joke. But inside, she felt like a shell, empty and brittle, ready to crack under the slightest pressure. The pre-boarding checks were routine, almost mind-numbingly so. Amanda moved through the aircraft cabin, checking seat belts, stowing loose items, and ensuring everything was in order. She barely noticed the passengers as they began boarding, their faces blending into a blur of anonymity. That was until Charles Bennett stepped onto the plane. He was tall, with a strong, commanding presence that seemed to fill the aisle as he moved. His salt and pepper hair was cropped close to his head, and his posture was as straight as a soldier standing at attention. His dark eyes scanned the cabin with an air of quiet authority, taking in every detail with the precision of someone who had been trained to notice things others might overlook. Amanda's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than she intended. Something about him, his calm confidence, his unassuming strength, stood out amidst the chaos of boarding. "Good morning," she said, her voice professional but polite. Charles nodded in acknowledgement, his expression unreadable. He handed her his boarding pass and made his way to seat 1C in the first-class cabin. The flight was scheduled to be a routine journey from JFK to LAX, a route Amanda had flown countless times. As the plane took off, she felt the familiar rush of acceleration followed by the smooth ascent into the clouds. But just as she began to relax, turbulence struck. The cabin shook violently, sending unsecured items sliding across surfaces and eliciting gasps from passengers. Amanda gripped the edge of the galley counter, her knuckles white as she braced herself against the unexpected jolt. Coffee sloshed over the rims of cups, and the seatbelt sign dinged insistently above the passengers' heads. "Rough air ahead," the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Amanda sighed, straightening her uniform and steadying herself. Turbulence was an occupational hazard, but it always added a layer of stress to her already frayed nerves. Moments later, her colleague Sarah approached, her face tight with concern. "We have a problem," Sarah whispered, leaning close to avoid alarming nearby passengers. "What now?" Amanda asked, her tone sharper than she intended. "That man in 1C, Sarah continued, glancing toward the first-class cabin. "Apparently, he was supposed to be in economy. Corporate just called, they want us to address it immediately." Amanda felt her stomach tighten. Problems like this always landed on her shoulders, and today she had neither the patience nor the energy for it. She took a deep breath, plastered on a polite smile, and made her way to the front of the plane. Charles Bennett sat calmly in his seat, a magazine open on his lap. Despite the turbulence, he appeared completely unbothered, his demeanor as steady as a rock in a storm. "Excuse me, sir," Amanda began, her voice carefully controlled. "It seems there's been a mistake with your seating assignment." Charles looked up, his expression neutral. "I don't believe so," he replied, holding up his boarding pass. "This is the seat I was assigned." Amanda studied the ticket. It clearly displayed 1C, first class. But she knew corporate policy dictated that errors like this had to be corrected immediately, especially when it involved a high-paying customer who might have been bumped to economy. "I understand, sir," Amanda said, forcing her tone to remain polite. "But it appears there was an error in our system. Your ticket was issued for economy class, so I'll need you to move to your assigned seat." Charles's eyes narrowed slightly, but his tone remained calm. "Ma'am, I have a valid boarding pass for this seat. If there's been a mistake, that's on the airline, not me." The plane jolted again, and Amanda stumbled slightly, gripping the back of a seat to steady herself. Around them, passengers began to murmur, their whispers growing louder as they sensed the tension building. "Sir," Amanda pressed, her patience wearing thin. "I need you to move." "With all due respect," Charles interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind, "I'm not moving. This is the seat I was given, and I intend to stay here." Something inside Amanda snapped. Years of pent-up frustration, of biting her tongue and suppressing her emotions, surged to the surface like a tidal wave. The whispers from the surrounding passengers felt like daggers, each one piercing her carefully constructed facade. "Move now," she snapped, her voice louder than she intended. Charles didn't flinch. He simply stared at her, his calm demeanor an unyielding wall against her rising anger. And then, without thinking, Amanda acted. Her hand shot out, shoving his shoulder with a force that shocked even her. The sound of the impact seemed to echo in the suddenly silent cabin. Gasps erupted from the passengers, followed by the unmistakable sound of phones being pulled out and cameras being activated. Dozens of lenses were suddenly pointed at Amanda, capturing her every move, every expression, every mistake. Charles remained seated, his expression unchanged. He didn't retaliate, didn't raise his voice, didn't even seem angry. Instead, he simply looked at Amanda, his eyes filled with something that felt far heavier than words could convey. The weight of what she had done hit Amanda like a physical blow. Her hand trembled as she stepped back, her face flushing with a mix of anger, shame, and disbelief. She turned and fled to the back of the plane, the whispers and camera flashes following her like a relentless storm. The unraveling. Amanda paced back and forth in the galley at the rear of the plane, her hands trembling as she replayed the moment over and over in her mind. The cabin lights flickered slightly as the turbulence subsided, but inside her, the storm was just beginning. She glanced at Sarah, who stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, her wide eyes a reflection of Amanda's spiraling panic. What did I just do?" Amanda whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. Sarah said nothing. Instead, she grabbed Amanda's arm and pulled her further into the galley, away from the other flight attendants who had started to gather near the curtain separating first class from economy. "You need to calm down," Sarah hissed, her voice low but urgent. "Passengers are recording this, Amanda. Corporate is going to." Amanda cut her off with a sharp glare. "I know, okay? I know I messed up. I lost control." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she ran a shaky hand through her disheveled hair. Through the narrow gap in the curtain, Amanda could see Charles sitting motionless in his seat. Despite the dozens of phones pointed at him and the whispers swirling around the cabin, he remained composed. His calmness only made Amanda feel worse. Sarah leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you have any idea who that man might be? He's not just some random passenger. There's something, I don't know, important about him." Amanda's mind raced. The thought had occurred to her, but the intensity of her emotions had left no room for logic. Now, in the aftermath, the weight of Sarah's words sank in. What do you mean? Amanda asked, her voice tinged with desperation. He has that look, Sarah replied, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Like he's someone who's used to commanding respect. Military, maybe? High-ranking? You could be in a lot of trouble. Amanda felt her knees weaken. She slumped onto the fold-down jump seat, staring blankly at the galley wall. Military. Of course. She'd seen his bearing, his composure, the way he carried himself like a man who had faced far worse than a disgruntled flight attendant. What do I do? Amanda asked, her voice trembling. Sarah sighed, glancing at the curtain again. Right now? Nothing. Just stay back here, let him calm down, and pray this blows over. The plane touched down at LAX, the wheels screeching softly against the tarmac. Amanda stood rigid at the back of the cabin, her heart pounding in her chest as passengers began to disembark. She could hear the murmurs and feel the sidelong glances from the economy passengers as they filed past. The first-class passengers, however, lingered, their whispers sharp and judgmental. Charles was the last to leave. He stood slowly, adjusting his jacket before retrieving a simple black duffel bag from the overhead compartment. He turned toward Amanda, his dark eyes meeting hers across the length of the cabin. For a moment, Amanda thought he might say something. A rebuke. A comment. Anything. But he didn't. He simply nodded once, a subtle gesture that could have meant anything, or nothing at all, and walked off the plane. Amanda exhaled, her breath shaky. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. When Amanda emerged into the terminal, the media storm hit her like a tidal wave. Dozens of reporters had gathered near the gate, their cameras and microphones poised for the spectacle. Someone must have tipped them off during the flight. Amanda Cartwright, one reporter shouted as she stepped into the open. Why did you strike a passenger? Is it true you assaulted a decorated veteran? Do you have a history of racist behavior? Amanda froze, her mouth dry. The words felt like physical blows, each question a knife twisting deeper into her gut. She hadn't thought about it in those terms, race hadn't even crossed her mind in the moment, but now, faced with the media's framing, her actions seemed infinitely worse. 2 security guards appeared at her side, guiding her through the crowd with firm but measured steps. No comments at this time, one of them said to the reporters, his voice monotone and rehearsed. Amanda kept her head down as they led her to a private office near the terminal's administrative wing. The small room was cold and sterile, its walls adorned with generic motivational posters. A legal representative from the airline waited for her, her face set in a mask of corporate professionalism. Miss Cartwright, the lawyer began, sliding a folder across the table. We need to talk. The meeting was a blur of legal jargon and thinly veiled threats. Amanda barely heard half of it, her mind stuck on the videos that were already circulating online. Her own social media notifications buzzed incessantly, the tidal wave of hate and condemnation crashing against her digital walls. When she finally checked her phone, her heart sank. Clips of the incident had gone viral, each one worse than the last. Different angles showed her striking Charles, her face twisted in anger, her voice raised. The comments were relentless. Fire her immediately. This is unacceptable. Another racist exposed. This man is a hero, and she's just another bitter flight attendant. Amanda's head spun. She could barely breathe. Meanwhile, across town, Charles Bennett sat quietly in a modest hotel room. The television played softly in the background, broadcasting yet another news segment dissecting the incident. His face filled the screen, accompanied by phrases like decorated veteran and model of dignity under pressure. Charles reached for the remote and turned off the TV. He leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the Los Angeles skyline. His phone buzzed on the table beside him, but he ignored it. Calls from reporters, messages from strangers, none of it mattered. Instead, he pulled out a small, weathered notebook from his duffel bag. He flipped through its pages, pausing on a photograph tucked into the back cover. It was an old picture of his son, taken years ago, during a family barbecue. His son, Marcus, was a lawyer now. A high-profile one known for taking on cases involving racial discrimination and social justice. Charles smiled faintly. He hadn't called Marcus yet, but he knew the moment was coming. His son would step in soon, not because Charles wanted revenge, but because he wanted the truth to come out. For Charles, this wasn't about personal pride or public sympathy. It was about something much larger, a chance to expose the quiet, insidious ways people like Amanda acted when they thought no one important was watching. He closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair, his mind already formulating a plan. Back in her apartment, Amanda sat alone in the dark, her phone buzzing incessantly on the coffee table. Her career was over, she knew that much. But what she didn't know was how far the repercussions of her actions would reach or how much of her life was about to be dismantled piece by piece. As she stared out the window into the Los Angeles night, one question haunted her above all others. Who exactly was Charles Bennett? The arrival. Amanda's world had shrunk to the confines of her small apartment. The buzzing of her phone had slowed, replaced by a heavier, more ominous silence. She hadn't gone outside since returning home. Each glance at the screen filled her with dread, each news headline seemed to tighten the noose around her reputation. Her career was undoubtedly over. Her face was plastered on every news outlet and social media platform, dissected and condemned by strangers worldwide. The hashtag Fire Amanda Cartwright was still trending, and now, more than ever, it felt like her name would never escape the public's memory. That morning, Amanda's doorbell rang for the first time in days. She froze mid-step, her heart leaping to her throat. She wasn't expecting anyone. The last time someone came to her door, it had been a local reporter trying to get a scoop. She tiptoed to the peephole and looked out. A delivery man stood there, holding a slim envelope. Amanda Cartwright? The man asked when she cautiously opened the door a crack. Yes? He handed her the envelope, gave her a brief nod, and walked away. Amanda closed the door and turned the envelope over in her hands. The return address wasn't familiar, but the name printed in bold letters at the top made her stomach churn, Marcus Bennett, ESQ. Miles away, Marcus Bennett leaned back in his office chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. His law firm, a prestigious one known for its work in civil rights and discrimination cases, was abuzz with activity. The incident involving his father had already reached his desk before Charles even called him. Marcus hadn't spoken to his father directly yet. Charles was never one for long explanations or emotional appeals. But the video footage and accompanying media storm had made the situation clear enough. The footage enraged Marcus, but not in the way the public assumed. It wasn't just about Amanda's outburst or even the physical assault. It was the deeper implication, the unspoken assumption that someone like Charles, despite his quiet dignity and extensive service to his country, could still be treated as if he didn't belong. Marcus was a man who believed in systems, legal, social, and personal. Systems could fail or succeed depending on how people chose to act within them. And in this case, the system had failed spectacularly. Amanda sat at her kitchen table, staring at the letter Marcus had sent. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the neatly printed document. It wasn't what she expected. Rather than legal threats, it was a request, an invitation, almost. Marcus had written a formal, but unexpectedly calm letter asking for a meeting. Ms. Cartwright, it began. My name is Marcus Bennett, and I am writing to you not as a lawyer, but as the son of the man involved in your recent actions aboard Flight 217. My father, Charles Bennett, has asked me to assist in ensuring that what occurred is fully understood and addressed in a manner that promotes accountability and resolution, not destruction. I believe you and I have much to discuss. If you are willing to meet with me, please contact my office using the enclosed details. Sincerely, Marcus Bennett, ESQ. Amanda read the letter twice, then a third time, before setting it down on the table. Her first instinct was suspicion. Was this a trap? Was Marcus planning to lure her into a situation where she'd be forced to grovel on camera, adding more fuel to the fire consuming her life. But the tone of the letter didn't match her fears. Marcus's words weren't laced with malice or vindictiveness. They felt professional. Controlled. Still, Amanda hesitated. Facing him, let alone talking about what she'd done, felt unbearable. But deep down, she knew she didn't have many options. The meeting was set for the following afternoon. Amanda arrived at Marcus Bennett's office building with her heart pounding in her chest. The modern, glass-walled skyscraper seemed to tower above her like a symbol of everything she had lost. A receptionist led her to a private conference room. Inside, Marcus was already seated, reviewing a stack of documents. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. He was tall and sharply dressed, his dark suit impeccably tailored. His resemblance to Charles was undeniable, the same piercing eyes, the same quiet authority. "Ms. Cartwright," Marcus said, standing to shake her hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, his demeanor professional but guarded. Amanda nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "Mr. Bennett," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus gestured for her to sit, then took his own seat across from her. He took a moment to study her, as if trying to gauge her sincerity. "I want to start by saying this," Marcus began, his voice measured. "My father has asked me not to press charges against you. He doesn't want this to turn into a legal battle." Amanda's head snapped up, her eyes wide. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly tempered by confusion. "Why?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "Because my father believes in second chances. He's seen more than his fair share of mistakes, some small, some catastrophic. And he knows that judgment without understanding rarely leads to real change." Amanda felt a lump rise in her throat. She had expected anger, accusations, maybe even threats. But this was different. "Then why am I here?" she asked hesitantly. Marcus tapped a finger on the table. "Because while my father may be willing to forgive, there are still consequences to your actions. And I want to make sure you understand the full weight of what you've done, not just to him but to yourself, your career, and the broader implications of your behavior." Amanda flinched at his words, but nodded. I know I made a mistake," she said, her voice cracking. I don't know how to fix it." "That's what we're here to figure out," Marcus replied. Over the course of the next hour, Marcus walked Amanda through a series of hard truths. He didn't sugarcoat her actions, or their impact, but also didn't treat her as a lost cause. "You need to understand," he said at one point, "that what you did wasn't just about a seething mistake or a moment of frustration. It was about what that moment represented. My father has spent his life proving he belongs in spaces where people like you think he doesn't." Amanda opened her mouth to protest, but Marcus raised a hand. "I'm not saying you're a bad person," he continued. "But your actions came from somewhere, something inside you that saw my father and assumed he was out of place. That's what you need to confront if you want to move forward." The words stung, but Amanda couldn't deny their truth. She felt the weight of everything she had ignored, every assumption she had made without realizing it. By the end of the meeting, Amanda felt drained but oddly lighter. Marcus's approach wasn't what she had expected, but it left her with a strange sense of hope, a fragile possibility that she might find a way to atone. Later that evening, Charles Bennett sat in his hotel room, watching the sunset. When Marcus called to update him, Charles listened quietly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "She's listening," Marcus said. "I think she's starting to understand." Charles nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Good," he said simply. "That's all I wanted." Redemption and renewal. Amanda hadn't slept the night after her meeting with Marcus Bennett. Her mind replayed his words, dissecting each truth and uncovering layers of herself she'd ignored for years. She had built a career on appearances, smiling through gritted teeth, and burying resentment beneath layers of politeness. The encounter with Charles Bennett had exposed those cracks, bringing her carefully constructed facade crashing down. But there was something else, something she hadn't expected, an ember of determination. For the first time in years, Amanda didn't feel like running away. She felt like facing the storm. The next morning, she reached out to Marcus's office, requesting another meeting. This time, she had a proposal of her own. Charles Bennett stood by the window of his son's office, gazing out at the bustling city below. The room was warm with sunlight, but Charles's presence was as calm and steady as ever. Marcus sat at his desk, his focus on Amanda as she laid out her plan. "I need to make this right," Amanda said, her voice clear, despite the nervous quiver in her hands. "Not just for your father, but for everyone watching. I want to apologize publicly, and I want to back it up with action." Marcus leaned forward, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Action? I know an apology isn't enough," Amanda admitted. "Words are hollow without follow-through. I want to work with organizations that support veterans, that fight discrimination, whatever it takes to show I'm serious about change. And if your father will allow it, I'd like to thank him personally." Charles turned from the window, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he studied Amanda, his dark eyes searching for something. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "Do you know why I didn't press charges?" he asked. Amanda shook her head. "Because I've seen what happens when people are thrown away for one mistake. I've served with men and women who carried mistakes like scars, but they learned. They changed. And I believe you can, too." Amanda swallowed hard, tears brimming in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Charles nodded once. "Let's see what you do with the chance." 3 weeks later, Amanda stood in front of a room packed with reporters. The event had been carefully planned by Marcus and his team. Instead of a corporate-controlled statement filled with jargon, Amanda would speak freely. She was terrified, but she knew this was her opportunity to take the first step toward redemption. She stepped up to the podium, cameras flashing like a strobe light. Her palms were clammy, her throat dry, but she forced herself to meet the gaze of the audience. "My name is Amanda Cartwright," she began, her voice steady, despite the pounding of her heart. "And I'm here today to take responsibility for my actions." She took a deep breath, grounding herself before continuing. "A few weeks ago, I allowed my frustration to override my professionalism and my humanity. I wronged a man who has served this country with honor and dignity. I wronged his family, and I failed to live up to the values I claim to uphold." The room was silent, every ear attuned to her words. "I've spent the past few weeks reflecting on what happened and why. What I've realized is that my actions weren't just a mistake, they were a symptom of deeper biases and assumptions I hadn't confronted in myself. I've let those biases dictate my actions for too long, and I refuse to let them define me any longer." Amanda's voice cracked as she continued. "I want to apologize to Charles Bennett, not just for what I did, but for the pain it may have caused him and others who saw themselves in that moment. I can't undo what happened, but I can, and will, work to ensure it never happens again." She stepped back from the podium, the room still silent. And then, from the back of the room, Charles Bennett stood. He approached the stage slowly, his bearing as steady as ever. When he reached Amanda, he extended his hand. Amanda hesitated, then shook it, tears streaming down her face. The moment was captured by every camera in the room. Charles leaned into the microphone. "Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook," he said. "It's about giving them a chance to prove they can do better. Let's see what she does." Over the following months, Amanda threw herself into her efforts. She volunteered with organizations supporting veterans, using her time and resources to amplify their causes. She worked with diversity training programs for airlines, speaking openly about her mistakes and the lessons she had learned. Her story, once a symbol of public outrage, became one of growth and accountability. Slowly, the tides of public opinion began to shift. Charles, meanwhile, watched her progress from a distance. He and Marcus had agreed to give her space, letting her chart her own path. But when Amanda invited him to a veteran outreach event she had helped organize, Charles decided to attend. The event was small but heartfelt. Veterans shared their stories, and Amanda spoke briefly about the importance of understanding and respect. When Charles approached her afterward, she looked nervous but proud. "You've been busy," Charles said, his tone light but approving. Amanda smiled, her first genuine smile in months. "I had a lot to make up for." Charles nodded, his expression softening. "You're on the right track. Keep going." Months turned into a year, and Amanda's life found a new rhythm. She wasn't the same person she had been before that flight. She didn't want to be. Charles returned to his quiet life, content in the knowledge that his silence had sparked change. Marcus continued his work, proud of the way his father had handled the situation. And Amanda, once a symbol of failure, became a testament to the power of redemption.